Given that we have gone virtual for our HIV/AIDS International Conference, I think that all of the organizers and people from around the world are really being very creative in how to use technology and how to bring us together. And it's so important, I think, to be creative at this moment because that's what the response to HIV and AIDS has been. So many people have been on the ground, grassroots organizers, activists around the world to get us to this point. Now we're in the midst of COVID-19, and we're going to have some very creative efforts for people from around the world and our own country to really beat this pandemic. And so given that HIV and AIDS is where we are, we still don't have a vaccine, but we have come so far well, it's been a long time, quite frankly, but we've come a long way. So I think at the beginning now of COVID-19, we have to look at HIV and AIDS and how we got very creative working together to get us this far and use many of those same strategies and energy and optimism to help us get through this pandemic.
It was on September 30th that we were together, Madam Chair, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and I, with Dr. Gandhi and with Cynthia Cary Grant in San Francisco when we launched our initiative for how we would welcome people to the Bay Area for this important conference. It was a happy day, wasn't it, Barbara? Almost 6 months later, March 27th, 3 days short of 6 months later, it was announced that it would be virtual. And as Congresswoman Lee has said, with the ingenuity of people on the ground, the volunteers using virtual social media effectively, we're going to have a great conference. We're going to be resilient. Resilience is the theme on how we've always approached the fighting AIDS, HIV and AIDS, and resilience is what we have to have this week to deal with it. But because of all the enthusiasm that we have seen along the way, we know that although the coronavirus keeps us apart, it does not diminish our enthusiasm for resilience in fighting HIV and AIDS and recognizing the importance of dealing with it globally. Right from the start in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, I came 33 years ago in June to the Congress. And right from the start in San Francisco, we knew if we were going to prevail and win in the fight against HIV and AIDS personally and locally, that we had to have a global solution. So we would have every year a candlelight vigil and march from Castro to someplace to recognize the importance of the international aspect of our fight against HIV and AIDS. So now we have President Bush in the White House. When we talked about doing PEPFAR, I said to the president, whom I work closely with on this subject, I agree with you, we should do PEPFAR, but if you want PEPFAR, we want big PEPFAR. We want this to be a big initiative. And he did too. And it really, I've traveled throughout Africa to different clinics and the rest that have taken advantage of PEPFAR, where people right, coming in the door and say to me, without the idea that there could be a therapy, I would never come in to be tested for HIV and bear the stigma of that without the prospect of a solution. And to his credit, President Bush continues his interest, as does Mrs. Bush, in their interest in PEPFAR and also other aspects of health related to HIV and AIDS, women's health related to HIV and AIDS. So this was really, I have to give Bono credit. He was part of all this. You remember, Barbara, Bono was very much a part of this. Yes. He was a catalyst in the communication on all of this. And it has been a remarkable success. And if I just may add, when I talked to the head of the World Health Organization about what could be happening in the Southern Hemisphere on the coronavirus, I asked him, has PEPFAR, the whole apparatus of PEPFAR, been a source of strength in this regard? He said it was.
Just building on what our speaker said, I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee during that time with Mr. Lantos and Chairman Hyde. also, as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, we had focused a lot on what was taking place in terms of the pandemic in Africa. And in fact, my predecessor, our beloved Ron Dellums, had talked to me about how about an AIDS Marshall Plan for Africa. So Leader Pelosi, myself, Ron, we all kind of talked and decided that we would really put together a bill. It wasn't even called PEPFAR then, but I'll always remember being with President Bush in the White House. Then Speaker Pelosi, Eddie Bernice Johnson was chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. And so we raised it then. Secretary Powell was there, Condoleezza Rice. And I think that he saw that this was not only the Congressional Black Caucus advocating because it was Africa. They saw that we had a coalition of Republicans, Henry Hyde, we had Mr. Lantos, we had Leader Pelosi, all working together with the Black Caucus to make sure that this could happen. And so the rest is history. But I was really, that's one time that I really believe that we need to capture that moment because, yes, Bono, the faith community, our activists, people of color, I mean, women, you know, we had some very difficult days and we had to negotiate a heck of a lot. I remember in the committee, the conscience clause they wanted to put in with regard to commercial sex workers. And I was so upset about that because we had negotiated the bill and the bill would have gone down had it not been for Democrats and Leader Pelosi and myself saying, okay, let's see if we can move this forward. Even though this is a terrible provision, but we're going to try to fix this later. But that was a moment of truth for me because everyone was looking to where I stood, to where Leader Pelosi stood on that terrible amendment. And had we not said we have faith that we can fix this later, who knows where we would be right now. So that is another moment that I remember very clearly that I hope we can actually use as a moment of how to come together to get the job done for the people.
San Francisco has been central to the story of HIV and AIDS, and it really has not gone from, it always has been a center of community-based research, prevention, and care. And that's because we were blessed scientifically and institutionally with the University of California, San Francisco. The whole Bay Area had a wealth of institutions that were intellectual resources to all of this. But when I came to Congress, again, 33 years ago this month, I came to fight against HIV and AIDS. That was my motivation. So when I was introduced on the floor as a new member of Congress, I didn't know I was supposed to speak. And then my colleague said, if you speak, be very brief, be very brief. So I went to the floor and I spoke and said, thank my mother and father and thank my constituents for sending me there. And then said, I've come to, I told them when I came here, I would tell you that I've come to fight against HIV and AIDS. So when I was finished speaking, people said to me, they were like glum. And I was like, well, I was brief. How could I be briefer than that? And they said, well, why would you want anybody to know the first thing about you was that you were here about HIV and AIDS? Why did you tell them that? And I said, well, because that's why I came. But what was a lesson to me was that the discrimination was there right there in the Congress at the time, 33 years ago. And that our fight was not just for, Congresswoman Lee had said, about a vaccine or a cure or a prevention to the nth degree and community-based care. It was about ending discrimination against people with HIV. And San Francisco, of course, has been in the lead. We took a terrible bite of that wormy apple. We were going to, as I said at the Grace Cathedral presentation, we're going to Grace Cathedral a couple of times a week, if not a couple of times a day, for funerals. It was a welcoming sanctuary. Funerals for people with HIV and AIDS. So shocking, losing so many friends. So again, we suffered from it, we learned from it, we had the intellectual resources to address it, and we understood that everybody did not share the same love that we had for people with HIV and AIDS. Of course, Congresswoman Lee, younger, kind of later and all of this, not that she wasn't active in the California legislature, But let me just tell you this one thing, because we abut on the bridge. I mean, we don't consider ourselves, different places. We're two aspects of the same place. She came to Congress. The first day she was there, oh, maybe it was the first day she was there on the floor, she had an amendment that made a very big difference in terms of funding for HIV and AIDS. And the next day, she went to South Africa for the conference. So she was not only effective from the start, she was effective before the start. She had a running start on her leadership on this subject, both as a legislator in California and then, of course, as a member of Congress, already recognized for her leadership.
Let me say a couple of things, just a little bit about my history as an activist. It was in Berkeley, probably in the late 80s. I don't know, Speaker Pelosi, if you remember Maudel Shyrick. She was on the Berkeley City Council. She was like the mother of politics in the East Bay. And she actually encouraged Ron to run for office. Well, Maudel called me one day and she said, come down here to City Hall right now. And I said, well, I'm working. She said, no, come down here. ACT UP is down here and you have got to come down here and be with us at this rally. I said, ACT UP, okay, I know ACT UP, but really? So I went down there with Maudel Shyrick and with ACT UP and acted up. And she insisted. And from that day forward, I said, wait a minute, let me just see what is going on in my district. And lo and behold, of course, the fact that the health disparities are huge in terms of communities of color in my district, the discrimination is huge. And then when you looked at where the funding was going, the CDC did not have the East Bay, did not have Oakland or Berkeley, even on its little map. As it related to HIV and AIDS. And so I had to go to CDC. And this was when I was actually, this was when I came to Congress after in the legislature, because I worked a lot on HIV and AIDS, needle exchange and what have you in the legislature. But when I got to Congress, I had to go to CDC and I said, wait a minute, the HIV AIDS pandemic is huge in my district in terms of communities of color, especially the African-American community. I have been to Africa with Leader Pelosi, with Bill Clinton on his delegation, and many of the same issues as it relates to access, care, treatment, prevention are the same issues in the Black community in my district. I said, so we have got to have some focus on Oakland and Berkeley because you guys don't even have it on the map. And I pointed to the dots. We were not on the map. So we had to fight to get it on the map. And then when Secretary Donna Shalala, was Secretary of HHS, we attempted to declare a state of emergency, a public health emergency as it relates to HIV and AIDS in the African American community. Well, we couldn't quite get the buy-in. And so I went back to Alameda County and I talked to my board of supervisors. I said, look, we can't get much traction right now on getting a national declaration of public emergency, but can't we do it in my county? So I'm really proud to say that my Alameda County Board of Supervisors passed unanimously. This was in 1998, toward the end when my first year in Congress, a resolution saying that we are declaring Alameda County a state of emergency as it relates to the African American community, as it relates to HIV and AIDS. And from that day forward, we were able to get on the dot. We were a dot now on the map. We got on the map and we got the Minority AIDS Initiative established. Still trying to get full funding, but with that, but Leader Pelosi helped us get the Minority AIDS Initiative. It's now in the Ryan White Act, but we've been fighting hard ever since then to make sure that we had the African American community and community of colors, and where the pandemic, it's almost like hotspots now with COVID. In the South, it's off the scale. Women, African American, men having sex with men, all of the target populations, we're still trying to get the resources targeted to where the communities really need it the most. And still we're behind, but we're catching up. And we're catching up. And I want to say to Speaker Pelosi, yes, it's been San Francisco that has provided a lot of the modeling and a lot of the vision. And we have taken what has happened in San Francisco and throughout the country and really put it within the cultural context that we need in the African American community and in the Latinx community.
The Congresswoman mentioned ACT UP, and I remember in the 1990 conference in San Francisco, which was so exciting for all of us that it was taking place in San Francisco, and Larry Kramer was there. and so was ACT UP. And I mention it because I believe that ACT UP and the mobilization against AIDS in every way, globally or locally, was a very important part of activism in our country, served as a model for other issues like breast cancer action, those kinds of things, to see a model of how outside mobilization impacts internal maneuvering and makes a difference in policy. And then, of course, when President Obama lifted the ban, oh my gosh, was that stupid to have such a thing? Was that stupid? I mean, okay, let's not even go there. But when President Obama lifted it in 2010, and I think became effective then, we were so excited about the change that would create. And that's one of the reasons we were super excited about having people come here and not have people barred because of HIV and AIDS, who were the intellectual resource that we needed to have to fight against HIV and AIDS.
But Speaker Pelosi, let me just interject here. We got to remember just a little bit of this history on lifting the ban, because you helped us do that legislatively. I had gone to Toronto, Canada, and with the NAACP and Julian Bond, and we took a pledge there that we were going to make sure that we had a conference in America. And it was at that conference I said, but wait a minute, my staff reminded me, we can't do that because there's this ban. So I came back and talked to you. I introduced the legislation, and we ended up putting it in the PEPFAR bill to lift the ban, knowing that the second PEPFAR legislation had to be signed. And so it was President Obama, yes, that was able to lift the ban, but your leadership and the Congress had a heck of a lot to do with that. And it was really, I think, a really exciting moment to be there when that ban was lifted. But I think that shows we had to do it together, and we did actually include it in that PEPFAR bill.
Well, it's funny because so much of what happens is because of our congressional action, but you never know it because it's always about the president.
Yes.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that we have our House Democratic Caucus is over 60% women, people of color, LGBTQ. Quite different. When I went to the Congress, as I say, 33 years ago this June, there were 23 women in Congress, 12 Democrats and 11 Republicans. We made a decision right then and there, okay, enough of this. We've made a decision, we're going to increase our numbers. Right now, there are 105 women in Congress, 90 of them are Democrats, 15 are Republicans, because we made a decision. We went from 12 to 90, they went from 11 to 15. And no offense, hopefully they'll get going with theirs, but we're very proud about it, and we want more. We want more people of color, more LGBTQ, more women, because nothing is more wholesome for the process than that diversity. And I always say our diversity is our strength.
Listen, what has it been, 230 years until we finally have a woman as our speaker? It's been quite a while. We've never had a woman as the speaker of the House. And so what Speaker Pelosi has done has not only broken marble and glass ceilings for women, but it's been about an agenda. And we're talking about HIV and AIDS today. We're talking about COVID-19. I could just cite chapter and verse that would not have happened had it not been having a speaker or a leader as a woman. And so it's so important to recognize that when women come into any elected office, they change the agenda. Not only do they put people as priorities in many ways, and come with that insight and the background and experience, we also contribute so much in terms of the strategic paths that we have to take. Speaker Pelosi, 5 children? She knows how to strategize to get the job done. And I've seen her do it just over and over and over again. And so women make a difference. Shirley Chisholm said, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Well, not only do we bring our folding chairs, we are here to stay. These chairs are there. And the whole country is I would say is going in a direction that would not have happened HIV and AIDS, the move toward a vaccine on COVID, addressing health disparities, looking at income inequality, look at racial justice. When you look at the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, when you look at so much that has been done, and I'm saying this because it's within me to say that it makes a difference to have a woman at the table.
I so wish that we could be there for this conference. As you know, it's in our DNA. This has been a priority for all of us since our first days in Congress, or in Barbara's case, even in the state legislatures and a community activist. Well, hopefully soon we can be all together, actually. But virtually, it's going to be a wonderful success because the challenge is still great. I never thought when we were fighting then, Barbara, did we ever think that these many years later, we still wouldn't have a vaccine and we still wouldn't have a cure? But we are on a path to be an AIDS-free generation in terms of other therapies that exist and enable people to have long and good quality of life. So again, AIDS has been an example. I wish that people would follow when it comes to the coronavirus. Barbara and I are certainly trying to make that the case.
We can achieve by 2030 an AIDS-free generation. And I think this conference, as a virtual conference, will lead us quicker to that maybe. You know, sometimes there are blessings in disguise, and we'll probably connect with more people. And so we have to really take this, seize the moment, and really commit ourselves to making sure that we are an AIDS-free generation in 2030. So thank you guys again. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you. Lovely to be with you always, Barbara. Thank you so much.